Okay. So today I was planning on doing a little review, a whole learning something new, and then we'll be doing a whole bigger project. So first of all, this is something that we have kind of been doing, kind of not been doing, semicolons. So in JavaScript, semicolons indicate the end of a phrase. For example, here I have a variable declaration. So let user likes chocolate equals true. But then in some cases, JavaScript will think, I'm trying to continue this on the next line, and that will cause an error. So it can put a semicolon here to tell the interpreter, yes, this is the end of the statement, run the next line as a separate statement. So where to use semicolons? Hmm. Basically, at the end of every function run and like variable declaration, but as you see, like if you have an if statement here, you should not put a semicolon after that because you're basically saying just stop interpreting there, and JavaScript will be very confused because you have a starting curly bracket and like the closing curly bracket is all the way over here. And since if you put a semicolon here, it'll just stop there. It'll give you an error. So basically, do not put semicolons after any kind of curly bracket because the curly brackets are already encasing something. If you're running a function like window.alert, you should put one after there. And okay, so this is something new, iteration. Iteration is basically repeating something over and over again. You can control how you repeat it. So, for example, this is the while loop. What the while loop does is it takes a boolean, so a true or false value, and it checks if this is true, then I want to run this. After I run this, is this still true? If it is, I'm going to run this again. And it's going to keep checking and running and checking and running until this is going to be set to false. So where is this useful? This is like commonly used when you have something like a payment where you want to wait until the user has inputted like a specific PIN or inputted a password correctly, or given you either like yes or no, because if you ask a yes or no question and the user does not respond with a yes or no, you don't really know what they're trying to tell you. So you can do something like while invalid response and then prompt them again, uh, yes or no, and set that to invalid response equals, and then like your correct answer. So I can make sure that I get a yes or a no before moving on, no matter how many times the computer has to prompt a user before it's achieved. For loops are a bit different, and they're used when you want to repeat something like n times. The most common syntax for the for loop is for, and then in the parentheses, we have the variable, the condition, and the afterthought. So basically in the variable part, we're going to declare a variable. Here, I'm doing let I equals 0. So we're declaring a variable called I, setting it to 0. And notice that since it's in the parentheses, technically inside the for loop. So since I'm using let, the scope of I is within the for loop. I cannot, like, after this closing curly bracket, I cannot then put something like console.log I. That will shoot me an error since I is not defined outside of the for loop. If you're using some universal scope keyword like var, then I will be preserved after the for loop is done running and I can access it again. But usually we don't want that. We just want I to be a temporary variable that we can use for counting. So usually we just use let. And notice here, these semicolons are necessary because all three of these statements are on the same line. If you don't put the semicolons, JavaScript will have no idea what you're trying to say and how you're separating the variable condition and afterthought. Now, the condition is kind of the same as the condition in the while loop. If this is true, then this is run, and then it checks again and then runs again, and then checks again and then runs again until this is false. But the only difference is after running the action, every time the afterthought is run. So basically that's going to be modifying I, the counter variable, for some reason. Here, I'm trying to alert the number is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So then they were on I equals 8. Then we check, yes, I is less than 10 is true. So then we run the alert. And then we run the afterthought, which makes I 9. And then we check the condition again, and it's still less than 10. So we run this again, and then run the afterthought, but then now I is 10, so this will be false, which means it's time to move on, and this will not be run another time. So basically the for loop is just when you have a predefined number of times you want to repeat something. And I know the syntax is really confusing and like not as simple as something like a repeat loop where you just like put repeat 3 times. Uh, way I like to remember it, if I do for let I equals 0 and then I is less than the number of times I want to repeat something, I plus plus, then it will repeat that thing 10 times. So like here 10. But if I put like 20 there, this will be run 20 times. So there's something to keep in mind. So here is exactly how the interpreter will run this. So we have a for loop here, let I equals 0, I is less than 2, I plus plus. Starting off, let I equals 0. So now I is set to 0, I is less than 2 is true. So then we run the action, and then if the condition is false, then do not repeat. If the condition is true, do the afterthought and start running from here again. So that is basically how the internals of the for loop function. So, like I said before, if you do I is less than n and set I is equal to 0, then you should be able to just mimic a repeat loop. So I think it's time we should just like put this app into applications since it's going to be a bit confusing. So in the code space you created before, we are going to, yes, here. So you can add a 3.js and start coding some of these projects here. So project 1 give the user 10 alerts using window.alert, which I kind of explained before. Project 3.2 use window.prompt to annoy the user until the user inputs stop or actually like some kind of password you want to set, and then you can stop prompting the user. You're going to want to use a while loop for that. And then 3.3, count to 10 from 1 to 10 using a for loop. So I'll give you 10 minutes, 9 minutes to do this. So, okay, so if anyone is having trouble getting to this stage, let me know. Raise your hand. Okay then. Okay, so we have around 5 minutes left. Does anyone have any questions? Is anyone confused about what we're trying to do? If you have any questions, just like pop them in the chat or unmute and ask. Okay, that's the end of our 9 minutes. Does anyone want to share what they have? You can just like type it into the chat. No? Okay. So, moving on. Basically, these are my solutions. For the first one, alert 10 times, a simple for loop, I equals 0 to I is less than 10. And then for this one, I did I equals 0, I is less than 10 again, but instead of just window.alerting I, because that would start at 0 instead of 1, I just plus 1 to it, so that instead of alerting 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then for the third one, there I used a variable called stop. Is first stop set to true so that this part will run and prompt the user enter their stop to stop. And then if the response is actually stop, then I set stop to false, which in turn will stop the while loop from running. Now, comments. So comments are for nodes, descriptions, and code that you disabled for testing or some part you just don't want to run, but you want to keep it in the document anyways. So on code spaces, there's a really neat way to do comments. You press the control key and then the slash key, and it does that for you. And you type a comment, and then you can highlight this and do control slash key again, and it will uncomment. And it's also specific for each language. So if I go to an HTML document and press control slash, it will give me an HTML comment. So for JavaScript, the slash slash comment is a single line comment. Anything on that row will not be run. So, but like notice how this looks like two rows, but actually it's just one row, since if I type something that's really long, it may go to the next row. So if I type, but unless you press enter, it's not going to give you a new line. So if this is line 14 and I do slash slash, oh, sorry, this is an HTML document. So if I do slash slash here on line 1, then I type something really long, it will not run anything on line 1 because it's commented. But if I do an enter and it says line 2 here, then this is going to be runnable. Now, if you want to do a multi-line comment, you do slash and then the little star thing, and then to end it, another star slash. So anything in here is not going to run, no matter how long this is, how many lines it takes. All of that is not going to run since it's within these two and is thus a comment. So function is basically a piece of code that you want to run over and over again, but not in the way that you just like run it 10 times. So you might want to run it in one place and then run it in another place. For example, tell the user that an error occurred. So if an error occurs in one part of the program, I'm going to do send error. If it occurs in another part of the program, I'm going to do another send error, and it will just essentially do the same thing. Functions are uh, basically abstractions, since when I'm running send error, I do not have to worry about what's going on I just need to know that what this does is it sends an error. So kind of going to be like if you do Control C, you don't have to do right click copy, and like Control V is right click paste. So you don't have to right click the button anymore. You just have to run it with a shortcut. Also, they tend to make your code more reliable and cut down on stuff being repeated. So if I have like a version number here, like program version 1 error occurred, but then on version 2, I want to say project version 2 error occurred. If I don't use a function, I have to go back into my code and go to every single window.alert that says error occurred and put in version 2 instead of version 1. But if I run it with a function, then I can just go to the function and add version 2 instead of version 1. And since everything's running the function to send an error, all the errors will be saying version 2. So functions also have arguments and return values. So in the parentheses here, you can put in variables. They're kind of like variables, not exactly. So here, A and B are basically variables that you can use within add function. They're scoped variables, but the thing is you don't declare them. The user gives them to you. So if I'm running add 1, 2, then JavaScript will go back here and say, oh, so A is set to 1 and B is set to 2, only in the context of this function. So then it's going to do is it's going to return A plus B, which is 3, so it's going to return 3. And then see here, I put add right inside of the console.log so that the 3 being returned by the add goes directly into the console.log. So essentially we're saying console.log 3. So we just print 3 in the console. Okay, now we haven't talked about HTML in a while, so I want to go back to this and introduce a few new things. So first of all, for every project we've done so far, I've provided a template for you to code on, but that's not really practical if you're going to code something on your own. So if you have a, a blank HTML file here, then how do I run some JavaScript from the HTML? There are actually two ways. The first way is you use a script tag, and within that script tag, the content of that tab is actually going to be your JavaScript and what you're trying to run. So if I do script, and then I run this again, I should see that it gives me a window.alert that is being run from the HTML file. So basically, if you're using an HTML file and you just want to put in a bit of JavaScript, this is going to be how you're going to do it. Now, if you have a lot of JavaScript, if you have a whole program, you are going to want to link it to an external file. So instead of putting this inside script, I'm going to add a source attribute. And here I'm going to add a new file called file.js. So what it's basically doing is it's telling the browser, when you get here, look to file.js and run all the JavaScript code inside. So if I put an alert here, and we'll say hello. So remember how we learned about paths and absolute paths? So you want to be sure, for example, if index.html was inside another folder, say it's like home page, and I drag this in, notice that it's going to be, instead of this, it's going to be slash home page slash index.html. So then see this, it does not run the file because I put a slash here, meaning it's going to try and find from the root file, file.js, which is not existent. So if I remove that, run it again, it should give me hello because it's trying to do a relative path from home page. As you see, this follows. So let me just put in the new index.html real quick. And then we also can run JavaScript from a button. So basically what a button is it's an HTML element that allows you to click on it. I'm sure you've seen plenty of those. For example, this one. I go here. Ooh, it's actually not a button. So in most cases, it should be a button, but that's actually a link. I'm gonna try and find another button here. Apparently, apparently GitHub likes to have a ton of links then. So if I go here, okay, yeah, these are all links. Sorry. So what a button basically does, you can add an on click to it and then put some JavaScript in here. So, oh yes, notice this is already in double braces, so like parentheses. So inside the JavaScript, you want to use the single ticks or even backticks, so it does not interfere and cause an error. Notice like any other HTML element, the button needs to have a closing tag, and the stuff we put inside is going to be what's on the actual button. So we have this button here. This is basically like just the default style for the button. You can change it with CSS. And if I click it, it says hello. And every time I click it, it says hello. So basically saying when you're clicking this, I'll run this. So this is useful because you can control, you can let the user control when the JavaScript is being run. And for example, if you're trying to load something onto the screen and you want the user to say, oh, load it in now, you can just add a button. And when the user clicks it, JavaScript will load something in. So now we have around 20 minutes left, and we've gotten to basically our creation project number one. This is like a big project. You're going to be starting pretty much from scratch. So from this repository, you're just going to have an index.html here, and you're going to create all the other files and code everything by yourself. So first step, go to this repository and then click fork. Okay, so are you having trouble forking the repository? Okay, so moving on. So once you have done that, go to code spaces, click new code space, and then you're going to select the one you just forked. Hopefully you named it something like blank, so it's easy to see, and then click create code space. And it should take you to somewhere like this, where you have a static folder and an index.html. So basically what the question game is something like this, where as you see you have a button, you click it, and then this comes up. It's basically a game using window.prompt and window.alert to tell a story, like text-based story. So for example, here it asks me for my name, and it uses my name and says hello to me by my name. So here it's asking me to enter either hammer, flower, or shovel. So you can do that with an if statement and check that the user is actually entering one of those three options, or use a while loop and keep prompting them until they enter valid solution. So basically try and make a game like that, and there make it so that there's like a successful path and an unsuccessful path, and there are lots of decisions, and you have until the end of class, potentially some of next class. No, and as always, just like raise your hand or pop it in the chat if you have any questions about like forking the rep, forking the repository or the code space or the actual project. We have around 8 minutes left. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, that's about it for today. You are free to go. Bye.